My name's Nathan Van Zanny, and welcome back to Catching Steam. In today's video, we're going to be going over 3 different activities for thermal conduction. One of them, I admit, is a relatively common activity, but I have a couple twists to make it even better. 2 others, I don't feel like you've seen before. So, between the 3 of these, students are really going to be able to feel and see thermal conduction at play. Now, if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. All right, what I have here is 4 materials, and you can pick whatever you like, but I have a thick piece of steel right here, a thin piece of steel, a piece of foam, and a piece of wood. You decide what material is going to be best for you. Like for example, these thin pieces of metal, you have to kind of sand down the edges, otherwise they're going to be pretty sharp. These pieces may be kind of hard to source. I went to a local machine shop and they were able to cut these for me. You can also get them on websites like Mastercar or Midwest Steel, and this is a 3" by 3", and I think this one's 3/8 inch thick piece of steel, and this is a piece of foam that you can get at any hardware store. I just had to cut it into 3" by 3" pieces, and this is a 1x4. You can tell it's a little bit bigger, a little bit wider than the other materials. If you like, you can cut this in the exact size, but it's really not going to make a difference. And this I also got at a hardware store, and I just cut it with an angle grinder, but if you have someone that has like a press brake or something, they could cut these pieces. Otherwise, you can also order them from companies like Mastercar and Midwest Steel just to get thin pieces. But you can also get different materials like copper and aluminum and things like that. But how the activity goes is the first thing I'm going to do before I even give students ice or even let them have any ice or anything, you need to have them feel each material. So they're going to feel the copper or feel the steel, each piece of steel. They're going to feel the foam. They're going to feel the wood. And they're not going to hold their hands on it. They're just going to kind of just quickly feel it, each one. And then what you're going to do is you're going to have them put them in order on coldest to warmest. So which one feels the coldest, which one feels the warmest. And students are going to essentially say the metal feels the coldest, the foam feels the warmest, and the wood is kind of in between. Now, the really awesome thing with this is they are all actually room temperature. So they're all been sitting in my room here, and this one, they're all about 70 degrees. Now, the same thing is true at home. If you have like tile or a wood floor versus carpet or a rug, the wood and tile is going to feel much colder than a rug would feel or carpet, even though they're all room temperature, and that has to do with conduction. So here, after this, here's how the activity goes. You give them pieces of ice. This is just ones out of my freezer. These are honestly a little larger than what I would recommend, but they work for this activity. And you're just going to have them put a piece of ice on each material here. And you can do different things. You can have them collect how much water is coming off of each one. But as you can see right away, the metal, which felt the coldest, is melting the ice really quickly. There's already a huge pool of water in here. The foam and wood are doing essentially nothing. This piece of metal here is melting it a little bit, but nothing too crazy. Now, this is kind of where I come into my first issue, is if you really want to be melting water, especially if you're comparing like steel to copper or aluminum, the problem is this ice starts to float on top of the water. So then the ice is no longer directly touching the metal. It's just floating, and there's still conduction, but it's conducting through the water now and not just directly through the material. And so that's where I 3D printed these. If you want to use them or print them yourself, the file is in the description, but essentially you can see there is a little V notch right here for the water to drip out, and then it just hooks on the end. So it would go like this, hook on the end, and then you have to have it at an angle. Now you can see all that water is going to be pouring out, and so now this can be directly touching each material. Now to get it to prop it up, I just used another one that I printed. I just flipped it over and propped it up like this, and now there's a nice little angle for this water just to be draining out of. So now it's no longer sitting on a pool of water. I could do this for these materials for you too, but you know this is never going to really melt the ice. This one here has a good initial melt, but after a while, this whole thing cools down and doesn't have enough heat capacity to melt the whole thing of ice. So even though these are essentially the same materials, this one, as you can see, is melting the ice very fast. So I'll just let this keep rolling for a minute and I'll do a little time lapse for you. Okay, now we've been going for a couple minutes here, and you can tell this ice here is almost gone. This one, the foam hasn't hardly melted. This one's melted a little bit, and the wood's barely done anything as well. So the material that felt the coldest melted the ice the quickest. So why does that make your hand feel cold? Well, what you're feeling is cold is the heat leaving your body. So when you touch something cold, what's happening is that material is able to pull the heat from your body, making it feel cold. But in this case, it's able to move the heat from the material into the ice. So the cold isn't moving into the material. The heat is able to move throughout the whole material into the ice cube. So if you were to feel this now, this whole block feels cold, and this feels warm. So this still feels warm, this still feels warm, this feels cold. And because the heat is able to move from this material into the ice to melt the ice. Now, what I typically do is I have students melt ice for about 5 minutes or so, see how many ice cubes they can melt, or 5, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, whatever you want to do. And then they're able to finish the rest of their assignment, make their observations. But the big thing I want them to know is that the heat is moving from this material into the ice. The cold is not going into this material. Okay, I'm just going to explain this really fast in case I didn't explain it very well before. So when the ice is placed in all these materials, that very surface layer of molecules is getting cold in all of them. The difference between a conductor and insulator, though, is that a conductor, when those molecules get, let's say, cold because the heat is leaving from there, like the vibration molecules are leaving there to go into the ice, they're able to, essentially get help from the neighboring molecules. So those neighboring molecules are able to move into the center and warm up those center ones. So the molecules that just got cold, they're able to get warmed back up. So progressively over time, this entire block is going to start getting cold because all the heat, so all the energy is moving into that center spot where the ice is at. Here on the styrofoam, though, that's not the case. So when this surface layer gets cold, since this is an insulator, those molecules are not able to transfer their energy into that center part where the ice is at. So just that surface layer is essentially getting cold, and it's not able to get help from all the other neighboring molecules. So that's really what makes a huge difference between a conductor and an insulator, is how well they're able to essentially assist each other on transferring energy. So this does a good job of that. This does a terrible job of that. Now, if you were to get aluminum or copper, they would do even better than the steel. So again, you can go to either if you know a welder, if you know a metal fabrication place, they would be able to get these pieces of metal cut. These you're going to probably have to cut yourself. Any serrated knife or a bandsaw would be able to cut this material really easily. The downside of this foam is students are going to start marking into it and pressing and cutting into it. So you're going to want to make a lot of extra styrofoam blocks. The wooden blocks, you don't really have to worry about that as much, but you can have a few extras on hand. These are extremely cheap materials. These ones cost a little bit more, but hopefully that helps. Okay, this next demonstration, you can do this as an activity for students, but it's pretty quick, so I would just probably recommend, for the sake of time and money, probably just do this as a demo to really help explain that ice melting activity from before. So what I have here is a piece of styrofoam. It's a pink styrofoam. You can get it in any hardware store. This is a big chunk of aluminum. You can, again, buy this from a lot of different online retailers. These are both 6 inches by 6 inches. The thickness isn't really going to matter for this. But if your students are really aggressive with materials, maybe get wood instead of foam. The foam works better, but it's very easy to poke holes in this and dig your fingernails into it. So if your students are anything like mine, they definitely do that. So I do not let them really have the foam because they end up destroying it really quickly. And I'm tired of repainting them over and over again. But what you do is after you paint them with this thermal paint, I'll put this link in the description, but essentially this paint is red at room temperature, but then when it gets to about, I think it was like 85 or so degrees, it turns yellow. So with your body heat or body temperature, you can turn these yellow. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put my hand on both of these. I'm going to kind of press them really hard on both. And then, as you can see, I have a handprint on here and nothing on the aluminum. And my handprint's staying there for a while. And this one, like I said, this aluminum, I can sit there and hold my hand on here for a very long time. I'm never going to get my handprint on this, because this is a very good conductor and this is an insulator. So this is kind of the reverse of the activity before with the ice melting. For there, the heat was going into the ice. Now this time, I am warming up that top layer, those top layer molecules. But here, that heat isn't able to transfer through those molecules. So as soon as I warm up that top layer, which happens to be the paint, then I'm warming up that paint and nothing else really. So my handprint is able to stay there. But as soon as I put my body heat on this and I warm it up, I'm warming up the entire block of metal and not just this top layer. So that heat is able to transfer and conduct through this entire material, so I can never warm up this and to show my handprint. While this, on the other hand, you can. So if I do this again, put my hand on it and take my hand off, again, you can see my fingerprint pretty well. Now, if this doesn't work for you, just kind of realize it could end up depending on your blood circulation. So then in the colder months, it typically doesn't work as well because, you know, your hands are a little colder than, you know, in the spring and summer. So what I found that helps is if you take like an ice pack and you kind of put the ice pack on this, not only does it change it back, but it makes it so your handprint shows up much better. And before this video, that's what I had to do because mine wasn't showing up. So I had to put this in the freezer or just put a little ice pack on it, rub an ice cube on it, and it goes away pretty quickly. So now there is another little demonstration you can do. If you don't want to use the handprint technique, you can just get those blocks of metal that I had before and you can warm them up and then you can put them on each one. So let me go grab one of those really fast. So I set both of these just on a little burner just for a minute or two, just to get them so they're very warm to the touch. I obviously don't want to be melting anything or destroying any paint. So like I said, just warm them up. And then if I take them off, you can see a very clear indication that this paint warmed up, and right here it didn't. So this, and notice it also didn't transfer through the material. So it warmed up right where this square was, but didn't really go any further. So that's another example of an insulator versus a conductor. Okay, just to prove the aluminum was indeed thermal paint and not just, you know, red paint, and I was just messing with you. I put both of these in the oven. This was the foam and this was the, this was the aluminum. So if I put this on here, you can maybe tell really quickly, it turns red right instantly. So let's see if you can see this okay. So if I put this here, it's red right underneath where that ice is at. I can move it anywhere and that's red. But when I move it, this whole thing is still yellow. And that's because this is such a good conductor that as soon as that one spot is cold, you know, that top layer molecules where that ice is at gets cold, it turns red, but then as soon as it moves again, that heat is able to conduct so quickly through this material, it warms it right back up. But if I was able to take this piece of foam, what's really neat is I can just dip my hand in this water, and because my skin is also an insulator, my body heat is able to move really quickly to warm up the skin of my finger. So I can cool down my finger. It can kind of maintain that temperature for a little bit. And so let me just get some of this water off so it doesn't drip all over. But I can just do, I don't know, that there, and something like this maybe. Not quite. Let's take this ice. Something like that. I got a little smiley face. So this is again another good example of thermal conduction. So this heat can't move throughout here to warm up, or sorry, cool down this piece of foam at this point. So this one here has been sitting for a couple minutes, and I've been putting ice on it for this video, and it's still taking a while to get back to red. So this is another little, maybe just a demonstration of heat capacity as well. How long can it hold on to heat? But anyway, I have one more little activity I want to show you that students would definitely be able to do. So stay tuned for that. So this last one admittedly took me a while to figure out how to do, because I wanted students to realize different materials conduct heat at different rates. So even though they're conductors and insulators conduct heat at a different rate depending on what material it is. So here I have a couple different conductors that I used. You can pick any supplies that you want, but these are the ones I stuck with. I have a wooden dowel here, which is an insulator. I have a copper tube, which I got at a hardware store. It was sold in a roll, so I had to straighten it out. I also got this copper rod at a hardware store. I bought it by the foot for it's called grounding wire. So that's what I use there. I also got this aluminum and steel. I bought it in 3-foot sections at a hardware store, and I cut it into 1-foot pieces here. If you don't have a metal bandsaw, or if you don't have an industrial tech program at your district, just any tradesman or tradesperson who has that does electrical or plumbing, they should have a metal bandsaw, or anyone who does any welding or fabrication of any sort should have ways to cut these metals. And then I also recommend sanding off, the very edges, so they're, just a little bit, they're not so sharp of an edge. I don't know if you can tell I'm looking what I'm showing you here, but just being able to round that off a little bit. And this last material here is the one I really recommend getting if you have the budget for it. It's called a heat pipe, and this conducts heat ridiculously fast. Just from the very beginning, just having students hold it on one end and touching an ice cube, you can just see their faces light up on how quick it gets cold. This is awesome. The downside of these is they're very fragile. Kids bend them very, very, very easily, so you have to be aware of that. Keep an eye on these. Otherwise, because they're about $12 each. So, if they're breaking a bunch of them, that can get expensive really fast. Otherwise, all these materials, they're pretty cheap, and there's no consumables here. They're going to last as long as, students treat them well. Now, the other thing that I did, I don't know if you can tell, they all kind of look purple. Found this thermal pigment. It's called pink to blue. It's cold activated. So this way I don't have to worry about giving students a bunch of hot water with that other red paint that goes red to yellow. That would work great too. It's just, I wanted to go a little bit safer here. So this is a pigment that has lasted a very long time. It's essentially a dust, and you can put it into anything that will stick to metal or wood in this case. I ended up picking fingernail polish just because this stuff is very tough and it sticks to metal really, really, really well. You can use anything though. But for this, I used, like I said, just a little bit of pigment, just enough so this wasn't really transparent anymore. This was clear fingernail polish. Whatever finish you're going to use, just make sure it's clear, transparent, and then you just dump some of that pigment in there. Just get it kind of dark so it looks purple. And then afterwards, you can use this brush. It's just going to take a very long time to use to paint everything on. So I just ended up pouring all of this into a test tube, and then I just kind of dip them into the test tube, roll them around a little bit, and then you can kind of fix it up with the brush if you want. it's not going to look great. It doesn't need to. It's just to visualize conduction. Another thing that's pretty cool with this paint is that because if you use something like fingernail polish or fast drying fingernail polish, it is endothermic. So as it's evaporating, it's losing heat. So this ends up turning blue pretty quickly as well. But I just coated each of these rods about, half, 2/3 all the way down. It doesn't need to be all the way where the water is going to be at. And then you just have students dip all of these in water and just to see how quick they go. So this is the steel rod. I'll move it a little bit closer for you guys. So this is the steel. This is a copper tube. This is the copper rod. And I'm trying to keep it so they don't touch. But this is the wooden one, which is never going to get cold, but it's fun just to throw those in there. And this is aluminum. And this one here is the heat pipe. I want you to pay attention how quick this turns blue. This is real time. And there it is. It's already blue. A couple seconds later. Now, the thicker of a coat you put on these, the more obvious it's going to be, the darker it's going to be. But this, I can kind of just hold it here just so you can see a little bit better. But you can see the blue is just going to slowly creep up these rods. Now, what's really happening is the heat is leaving these rods and going into the water. So it's essentially melting the ice that's in the water. But you can kind of see how well that these molecules are able to help themselves, So these ones get cold. Well, how easy is it for these molecules to go down to warm them back up? And then while it's doing that, it's slowly losing all the heat down into the water. Now, you might be asking, how does this heat pipe work? I can put a video down, but it's kind of cheating. It's using more of the water cycle than, the conductivity of copper or anything like that. But it's really cool how those work. So if you have at least buy one, it's really neat. Even just for students to hold it and touch on the ice and to see their face on how quick it gets cold. So here I'll just have students observe how long it takes for them to get all the way blue. And then afterwards, what I do is I have students hold this end and see how long it takes for them to warm it back up. And again, your skin's kind of an insulator, so it could take them a little bit for that heat to transfer. But yeah, so have students have them go blue, see how long that's taking. Is it 25% blue, 50% blue, 75%? How long is it taking? And now you can see this one's back to purple. But this is a heat pipe, so that's going to go pretty fast. This aluminum would take a little bit longer to go back to that purple color, but these are all great activities for students to help visualize conduction. So whether you want to just do that melting the ice, you can use essentially any piece of metal. You can use tile. You can use like those little tiles. Those work like literal tile you'd put on a backsplash. Those work. Anything that feels cold to the touch is going to be able to melt ice really quickly, assuming it's at room temperature. After that, that thermal paint for those different materials, having an insulator and conductor, having students realize that you can't warm up just one spot on a conductor. It transfers through the whole thing. And with these, being able to actually visualize the rate of conduction that's happening in different materials. They are all awesome activities for your students to help them really conceptualize what thermal conduction is. So if you have any questions or comments, please just leave them down in the comments. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much.